Have you ever struggled to know how best to support students in your class who are either diagnosed or maybe not diagnosed as autistic? Well, in today's episode, I've got two experts on exactly this. Dr. Christine and Dr. Sam are going to be sharing with us insights of what does autism display as in a classroom, the differences that you might notice between males and females, in particular linked to masking and why that often means why females might be diagnosed later on. And the key thing that I know you're all going to be interested in is the takeaways of what can you do as a classroom teacher to try and support these students that they feel more comfortable, fit in more, and help them get the best grades possible. So welcome to the podcast, Dr. Christine and Dr. Sam, and thank you so much for agreeing to come on and to share what I am very certain is going to be incredibly helpful ideas, takeaways, and insights for all of the listeners. But I'll let you just introduce yourselves first of all for anyone that hasn't come across you yet.
Yes. Well, hi, we're Dr. Sam and Dr. Christine. I'm Dr. Christine. I'm originally from England, but now live in the United States. And I first started working with autism in 1999. I had some working in the schools with kids with autism, knew very little about it at that point, and really started from the ground up. And the system there was really wonderful. As psychologists, we had a lot of time with kids in the schools. So I spent time in the schools, helping them in the classrooms, community, different types of support. And I'm now working in private practice with Dr. Sam. And a few years ago, we started the Neurodiversity Docs. So,
right. And my background is I grew up in Florida, lived all around the Southeast, and starting out as an accounting major and worked at a summer camp in college, just did some outdoor activities. They had a section that worked with adults and children with disabilities, and somehow got involved with that, not because I chose to, but it ended up changing my life and really helping me find my passion, and have a broad background university-wise in working with children with developmental disabilities across the board. And then again, similar to Dr. Christine, became involved working with children and adults with autism. And there's been such a need that really just, went with that. So I work primarily with preschoolers and young elementary school age children. And Dr. Christine works primarily with older children, young adults, and adults, all with neurodiversity.
Brilliant. And this is why, if anyone, this is your first episode you're listening to, the reason that I asked them to come on the podcast is I did an episode maybe about a year ago now where I did my own research and presented some information about students who may or may not have a diagnosis of autism, how it might present, and what teachers can do to help. But that was just based on my own limited research. So I thought it'd be really helpful for me to be able to ask some of the questions that you've been asking since the episode, but just get more information from people who have so much experience. So let's start off then just thinking about what does autism or what can autism look like in students? Like what sort of traits, what should teachers be aware of?
Right. So as most of us know, when we talk about autism, we do talk about a spectrum.
Yeah.
There are some children who are very severely impacted by autism and might have very limited language, very limited social skills. And so those are children that may not be as much in kind of a regular education setting, because the other end of the spectrum are children who do have very strong language skills. They are able to, although they may have some social differences, they are able to interact in the classroom, to understand everything that's going on. But there are the sensory differences. There often is the social trouble. Sometimes that typically they want to interact and make friends, but it's very hard and can be very hard starting very young. And then as you get into older grades, it continues to be hard just because the demands of socialization and building friendships and keeping friendships go up. We do see slower processing of information sometimes. Sometimes that does get misunderstood as maybe a lack of understanding, but it's really not a lack of understanding. It's just needing a little more time to process. So really the biggest thing we see is the social and communication communication, more terms in pragmatic language, as well as some of the rigidity or inflexible thinking. You mentioned in one of your podcasts, like if you have a test scheduled, that you keep on that schedule, because that's something that might sound like a great situation for most students, like, oh, good, we don't have a test today, can really throw our students off, whether that's in terms of routines, just not knowing what to expect, and that really can make it hard for our students with autism.
Is there any differences between the sexes, like a male with autism versus a female, or is it just completely just individuals rather than overall differences that are seen between sexes?
Yes, I think that's one thing that's really important is often the female autistic person is not identified as early as a male. In general, for most of my clients, the girls and young women are really good at masking. And socially, they've just learned to mask.
Yeah.
If you take a quiet girl in the back of the classroom, she might not get noticed, right? The teacher's busy trying to manage the whole classroom. And if she's at the back, sitting still, being very silent, then she's not going to get picked up as easily. So that's a really difficult piece, I think, for teachers, just in terms of being alert to females. And they are identified much less and sometimes much later as well. Yeah. I also think sometimes oftentimes parents will come in and they'll just know something's not right. Right? I think parents know, like I've come to really trust, and teachers often know too, their intuition that there's something here that isn't quite what it should be. Like something's missing, and you'll see a gap. That people will know, well, I know they're capable of this. I know they're intelligent. I know they can do this, but they're functioning down here on some level. And it's what's in that gap, and it's trying to figure that out. So I think that's often a red flag when you just have that sense of, I know this child knows this, right? I know my kid's better than this, but why are they? And then fill in whatever they're doing in that moment. That can often be something that can be a little bit of there might be autism there or some type of neurodiversity.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing we see with females with autism that goes along with the masking is often their special interests are more, if you will, socially acceptable. So it might be an obsession with art, which, often gets praised because it is probably very good work and they're probably very intense and focused on it, but it doesn't seem often atypical. Or it might be, let's say, a popular movie or a popular band. And so those obsessions, those areas of rigidity and focus seem pretty typical interests. But there is more underlying those things. And so a lot of times those things get misunderstood. Yeah. And Dr. Christine mentioned the masking. I think that's very true. And to the point of a lot of times our girls with autism, diagnosed or undiagnosed, they will really study or social cues, maybe from movies or just being around other girls or, TV, whatever it is, and pick up enough of those skills that they are able to be somewhat successful socially. And while that's great, what is happening underneath is really hiding their true selves and feeling like they have to hide who they are, which certainly can lead to other issues. But if we just look on the surface, they seem to be fitting in okay. Maybe they're not the most popular, but they're fitting in okay. And so that's something that is really important to understand. So our females at whatever age with autism don't have to just mask to be successful socially.
Yeah. And the underneath piece is really important. Yeah. Because over time, I try to imagine it. I don't have neurodiversity myself, but I try to imagine what it must be like every day, having to go into an environment and you're basically having to play a role, right? You're having to put the mask on, play a role, pretend, as well as all the sensory information, which, we'll get to later in terms of support, but just having to do that day after day after day, and then not always being successful, right? If you're defining success as, making connections with others, you may not be able to always in a way that you want to. So over time that, Dr. Sam's right, the internal piece builds up. So for a lot of the clients, we might see really high anxiety.
Yeah.
And I tell my clients, if I was having to do that every day, I would be really anxious.
Yeah.
Just speaking and never knowing if someone's going to be angry at me and then not knowing why. If I had that continually happening, my anxiety would be really high. So that internal piece will often come out. And again, that could be a red flag. We're seeing depression, we're seeing really high anxiety, but we're not sure why.
It must be exhausting as well if you're constantly having to think about everything you're doing in a way that someone neurotypical wouldn't be. It must be just a drain on your energy. But it's an interesting point, actually, because when I start to reflect on people that I've taught, I was in a girls' school in my last school, and there were students who were diagnosed with autism, but at age 16, 17, 18. And I do remember being quite surprised that they were being diagnosed so late. And I wondered, well, maybe it was family resistance to it, or just not aware, or maybe COVID had an impact because it was shortly after that. But actually probably is a lot of it. Thinking about the students, they were just quieter students. You probably just thought they're keeping themselves to themselves. They might have been labelled as quirky and they could just go under the radar. And interestingly, those students all did have mental health conditions as well, anxiety, depression, and that explains a lot to me, thinking about that masking, the toll it would take on someone having to do that. Absolutely. So what sorts of things could maybe teachers be thinking about that they could do in their lessons to support students?
In terms of providing support in the classroom socially or academically or across the board?
Well, that's a good question, actually. There's two different ways, so maybe we should focus on both. Let's start with the social one, because that's actually not a side I've really thought about much. That's a really interesting one. So socially, what sorts of challenges are these students facing, and how could teachers maybe facilitate and support to make that easier for students?
I'll start with that, and I know Dr. Christine will have stuff to add. I had a conversation recently with one of my clients who's a late middle schooler, early high schooler here around the age 13 or 14, and she is high functioning autism, if you will, does very well academically. I've worked with her since she was young, because my focus has always been with young children, but I've been doing it long enough. And we just happened to have a very frank talk about masking and social. We were talking with her about accepting neurodiversity and the idea that neurodiversity isn't wrong, that it's different, because there was a lot of perception that she was having about that. And, she was talking about, very earnestly, okay, if I can just figure out a couple things to do different socially, I know it'll work out. And it was really masking and really saying, I have got to change to be successful. So just backing up to what we were saying, and it may sound trite, but it's not, of our teachers and all of us really understanding those kids who do fly below the radar, male or female, that there may be something else underlying we really do need to look at and figure out how to provide support. And sometimes that support is, being aware, encouraging them, sometimes either themselves or if there's somebody else in the school kind of talking with them. Oh, I noticed this situation might seem like it was a little harder. You might want to try this, in a very accepting, kind way. With older students, of course, just really talking with them about their perception. And you mentioned one thing in one of your podcasts earlier, just the thinking about group work. And I think that's such an important thing, of how very often, teachers might do a group of 4, and that might work great for most of your kids. But okay, group work, yes, we do want to work together. Let's limit that. Let's have one other student who tends to just be more accepting and open, so that that's a positive social interaction. Some things we've done too socially is have an older age student be a peer model or a buddy, and not that one just teaches the other, but we really look at both strengths and figure out how they can work together. Perhaps one student is a little bit stronger socially, so he or she might help this student who it's a little harder. This student who needs help socially, it might be better in math, for example, and so he can help this student. So it really can be a peer model, but it's really peers working together to build those social skills.
And so then academically, what sorts of things could teachers be considering then? And yes, this is one thing I did struggle with because I want to be able to help people. I want the answer. And I'm very aware every person is different, whether you're neurotypical or not. And there isn't one size fits all. And that's one thing that I really struggled with, knowing what can I do to help someone who is autistic. And there isn't, I know there's not just one standard answer, but there's probably common things or a selection of challenges students might face academically, and therefore maybe a selection of ideas that teachers could try. So yeah, what sorts of things along those lines could they be trying academically to support a student?
Yeah, I think one thing that's important, and I think it bridges both the social and the academic, is that students really do well when they feel connected to a school. And it's really hard to feel connected if you don't feel like you belong, if you don't feel like you have your place or your people.
Yeah.
So one thing for my students is, you know, a lot of them will have a strong interest in something, you know, like Dr. Sam mentioned, it might be art or music, it might be, you know, lots of different things, robotics or engineering. If schools can create safe places that are clubs that are around the interests, then it can really help students to feel that connection. And it doesn't have to be, you know, a lot of time. It doesn't have to be a lot of people. If they have 2 or 3 friends and they know twice a week, I get to go to this room in the morning and we're creating whatever it is, or we're talking about this, or, you know, we're developing a video game or something, it can make a huge difference in terms of just feeling safe in that setting. And parents, I would encourage you to just, you know, if your child likes something and maybe there isn't a club, I would encourage you to go ahead and make one.
Yeah.
I've had parents contact local libraries and say, hey, can we set up a Pokemon club? You know, can we do a Dungeons and Dragons every weekend? And you'll start to find your people. So if you can find your people and have that connection, then I think that's a foundation then to begin the academics.
I think adding to that idea of connection is so important. And I think along with that, finding that person in the school who is a safe person.
Yeah.
It could be the direct teacher, it could be a counselor, it could be the principal. You know, there's lots of options, but so that student does have someone to talk to. And that doesn't mean has someone who's going to do a therapy session, but just talk to, hey, I had a bad day today, right? So there really is that support there, or being able to talk through some things. And I think along with that connection can go deeper into, you know, all the things we're talking about. How do we support our kids? And I think the support and the accommodations are scaffolding our children, building them up so that their strengths are enhanced or their weaknesses are enhanced. Not that we've got to do everything for them. Yeah. They usually just need some small things. And I do have all respect for teachers. And I know that adding even small things can be very hard. Yeah. And that's where, you know, really having a team approach or a school approach to understanding, you know, I was thinking through academically, a lot of our students with neurodiversity may also have executive functioning problems. So instead of having them have to take notes, we provide written notes for them or online notes, sometimes full notes or sometimes just leaving maybe blanks where they are writing some things in. We do have to take in consideration the physical writing. A lot of our students with autism may have fine motor concerns or just fatigue a lot with the writing. And it can be hard because when we think of, well, this student is brilliant, and they well are, but it's some of these little things we need to look at. I'm also reminded, as Dr. Christine talked about connection, there was a student I had years ago, and he had autism, and he was very smart and very interested in chemistry and was just doing things I didn't understand and probably still don't, I'm sure. But he was really struggling in our PE or physical education classes here where there were certain requirements. Those classes are often large and loud and doing things such as athletics or things they may not be good at. And so he was failing PE because he wasn't doing those things, which was going to possibly lead him not to graduate on time, even though he had already been accepted to a prestigious university and is a young man that I believe is going to change the world, because he has such great knowledge. And so that took a lot of just, the teachers understanding, talking through it. How can we support him? Because that was a requirement to take that class. But it just was so hard for him. Even on the outside, it just seems like he should be able to do it.
I think that's part of the challenge. Some of the things you were saying there, I was thinking about students that I've had, because I mainly teach A-level students. So they have to do their exams. An exam setting, we as a teacher don't really have any control over the fact that to get this qualification, you have to sit this 2-hour exam. There's things that can be done. It could be in a separate room. You can have rest breaks. But even then, I know some people, whether they are neurodivergent or not, are going to find exams challenging. But if you do get fatigue, if you do find that situation even more stressful than someone, and you are so capable, but you're being judged on this one snapshot, that is so hard. And with biology and with all the sciences, we do required practicals where it's in this lesson, you're doing this practical and we're assessing whether you pass or fail based on your physical skills in this practical. And we can be more lenient and understanding, but it does make me think bigger picture. I don't know how much that is being considered, or maybe it is being considered, but I don't see it being filtered down. Some kind of fairness between how people are being assessed to actually see their understanding, their skills and knowledge. And I guess that is going to lead to a lot of frustration for students and teachers if they can't change that. But it's good with the American model, I guess, is a school actually in charge of their own, you pass or fail in America at high school. Whereas we have the whole UK will sit this exam and it's just based on that. So we don't really get any say at all. I've not really thought about that in as much detail, because the classroom teacher, I was more thinking about day to day, what do I see? What can I do to help? Leading on something different, we were just talking about, before we started filming, something in your book about telling students to calm down if they are being triggered by sensory overload, because classrooms are noisy. There's flickering lights. In biology and science, there might be smells. It might be a smelly classroom anyway, because there's 20 teenagers in there. It's probably going to be a little bit smelly. It is overstimulating. And then if that is affecting how a student's behaving, like just calm down, it's all fine, that isn't helpful, because as you were saying, they might not know how to calm down. I realised I was guilty of doing that with my 5-year-olds. But you were saying that if they don't know how to calm down, there's a difference between just refusing to and not knowing how to. What sorts of things could classroom teachers do then? Instead of saying calm down, what could be more effective then in that situation?
Yes. Well, I think one thing is to start off by thinking, is this a skill deficit or is it oppositional, right? And working in the schools and just my 25 years working with autism, I think when I've made a mistake, it's because I've assumed it's oppositional when it was a skill deficit. And most of the time, I would say probably 98% of the time, it's actually a skill deficit on some level. So that's the first piece, because I think our first tendency probably is to go, oh, why are they doing that? They're being so noisy. They're being so, whatever it is they're doing. But there's something that's triggered them. There's something that's going on that's causing that. So prevention always is better than when you're trying to intervene. So one thing you might have to do, if a student, first of all, is agitated, is just to note it and then later come back to it, maybe the next day or something, and just sit down with the student and give them permission to describe what's been going on. Give them permission to tell their experience. Say, that was really hard for you. I know that was tough, and I know you didn't want to be, walking out of the classroom or running out in the middle of the exam. I really want to understand what that was like for you. Can you tell me what you were feeling in that moment? Can you tell me what was happening? And then really just be open about it. If the person knows they have autism, then you can say, I'm a neurotypical and I really want to understand your brain. I really want to understand what's going on and just help me. That will immediately provide some relief, and the student might start feel safe enough to start talking to the teacher and say, well, oh my gosh, the kid next to me who was tapping his pencil, it was just driving me, I just couldn't focus. Or the light over there, it's so bright, or your ticking clock. So over the years, I've adapted my office and, I don't have fluorescent lights. I've changed things, but my clients are very comfortable. And I'd actually put up some new artwork the other day, which had these kind of squiggly lines. And one of my adult clients came in and he was like, no, I can't do therapy in this office anymore. And I was like, what's going on? Well, what's the matter? He said, that art. He said, the lines don't line up. And it was sort of mud wall, right? The kind of plain art. And I was like, oh, I didn't realize. That was something I never would have thought of. Yeah, I did go back and then I actually got some mud wall and made the lines join up. And the next week he came in. Like, oh, much better. But that's one thing to do, like note. Sometimes all a teacher can do is note it and then come back and ask. Right? So you can't actually do something in that moment. But then talking about the prevention, you want to come back to the student another time outside of that time and then teach skills. So then you would say something like, I know that was really hard for you. It was really difficult to calm down in that moment. Let's work on how to calm down. Let's give you some skills to do that. So that could mean them, first of all, being aware of what their anxiety is. It's an old biological mechanism that was made for us to fight, flight, or flee, right? So if they can understand that from a biological part, first of all, then that's really helpful. And then after they've understood that, then you can give them other things to do, but thinking about those aspects. Right? So if it's fight, could they write things down in a journal? If it's flight, could they ask for a break? Could they say, I need to just go in the corridor for a moment, right? And then giving them techniques that can help work on the body base as well. So there's a lot of work now on the vagus nerve, which controls the sort of highway to fight, flight, and freeze. And there are exercises that can be done in that as well. Okay. But in my book, I try to make it really practical and I go over different steps and lay it out because I want things to be really sort of clear for people.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I was going to add on to that, as you're talking to day, one of the things that brings up for me is as I went through the many years of schooling that I did, probably like everyone else, I had some test anxiety, but it was never major. Although I found myself at my licensure boards tests, which back in the day, it was paper and pencil. And all of a sudden I realized an hour had passed over. That was a large part of however much time we had. And I had virtually done nothing. And I was stuck really because of test anxiety, kind of in that freeze mode. Now, as I'm relating this, what I realized is that I knew what to do. I got up, I could ask to go to the restroom, of course, had a little self-talk and got it back together. I was like, well, I'm either going to try, or I'm going to stay frozen. But a lot of times, especially, really at any age, but especially like A-level students who just often do well and we think academically they've got it, we don't really think to teach strategies. And also, I think part of those teaching strategies is helping them see what they want to try to do next time they do get overstimulated. So we're giving them control, which is important at any age. So at that point that I was talking about my licensure exams, I didn't know what to do and I was able to do it and get up. But I think even with teachers having so much to teach, even taking just a couple minutes, maybe just once a week, hey guys, remember we all can get really stressed and those emotions take us over. Just want to remind you to think about if you find yourself becoming upset, what strategy do you want to try to use? Do you want to ask for a break? Do you need a quiet way to signal I need a break? Do you need to remind yourself to take a deep breath? And so do you need my help? So making sure along with all the academic skills, they have those skills of knowing what to do when and if they get elevated, which is going to happen for all our kids, neurodivergent or not, but much more frequently for our children, with autism. So I think those types of teachings are often overlooked and can be done with a very short amount of time, but is really impactful across the board.
Yeah, absolutely. So in general, then, it's just thinking about the class classroom setting, social side of things, thinking about what their particular needs might be, having an awareness of anything that is sensory that could cause overload. So talking about prevention rather than, that's always easier, prevention, then trying to scale it down, being open with conversations, understanding. Most of these strategies, I would think most teachers, if you're a good teacher, you're going to be doing anyway. And so far, nothing that we've said costs any money. So that's always a benefit for the teaching system. And most of the things that you've said to me aren't standing out as that's going to be a lot of extra work. So it's more to just have this awareness and knowing what to try and what's the next step to try and better understand and help a student. And actually, I think quite a few parents listen to this as well because they've commented on some episodes. So it was useful to think about what parents can do as well. I love the idea of parents requesting clubs so they can feel more part of the community in the school as well. Any other final ideas as little takeaways that teachers could have, try or just be aware of as well?
Yes, try to be aware of your students' interests. There's research that's been done where if a teacher will just spend 5 to 10 minutes a day connecting with a student over an interest, then oppositional behavior declines, connection increases, and learning increases. So the way, if you think about it as somebody being closed up, maybe that students learn to be closed up over time. So the way in is always through the interest. And be genuine about it. I mean, I have clients with all different types of interests, and I genuinely am interested in everything they're interested in because they're so interested in it. Yeah. They're passionate about it. They love it, and they get me all caught up in it. And I'm like, I never knew that about, whatever it is. So find something you love about their interest and go watch their favorite anime. Come back and say, hey, I watched that, the rocket go to wherever the other day, or I looked this up on robotics, or that's so interesting about physics. Go step into their world for a little bit. I have students who say, you don't know what it's like, Dr. Christine, to be all day having to talk about what other people are interested in. And I'm not interested in it. And then for 5 minutes, I just want somebody to talk about this one thing, and they won't. Nobody asks me about it. Nobody tells me anything about it. And nobody will even talk to me about it. So you've got to, I guess, sort of putting it this way, you've got to put the money in the bank in order to make the withdrawals as a teacher. So connecting with their world and their interests is putting the money in the bank. And if you don't have the currency in there, you're not going to be able to make the withdrawal.
Yeah, I love that idea.
And I think as you were talking about, A-levels and exams, certainly there's protocols that have to be followed and all of that. But I think it's really thinking about it before then. Again, helping them know what strategies they want to use at that time. And I think also along with the connection and talking about interests, because I agree, there are lots of things I've learned about that I have to say at first I was not interested in. And on my own accord, I probably never would have been interested. However, I am interested because it's important to several clients. And I think also, especially with masking, is this idea of hidden cumulative stress, meaning we all know it, we all can look great, like everything's going fine. We might be, for whatever reason, kind of at the top, and a small thing's going to set us off, which may be personal, it may be academic-wise, anything. But I think as you were mentioning the parents in the schools, on the day-to-day basis, being able to cooperate, meaning if a parent says, look, whatever, Johnny and his brother had a really big argument yesterday and it's really stressed him out, like the teachers being a little more aware that day, because we kind of forget all the emotional state that's inside. And kind of the same thing, if let's say you had an exam and the student just had a hard time, maybe just mentioning that to mom and dad. So there's just a little extra chance for rest for that student.
Yeah, so communication there is going to be very, very key. And if anyone wants to find out more and be able to talk to you, get more ideas, what could they do or where could they go to find you?
Yes, well, we have our Instagram. So it's at the Neurodiversity Docs.
I'll link that below as well.
Yep, it'll be in the link. So just go ahead and follow that. And then I have a book that I've written. One of my clients actually told me I should write it. So he was like, Dr. Lay, you are one person person in one office, seeing one person at a time. You need to get this information out. And he was wonderful. He came in every week and would say, what page are you on? And I'd be like, and so I knew it'd be coming for a session. I'd be writing, really fast and trying to get it done. But anyway, this is the book. It's called Autism Rules, and it's available on Amazon. And I've tried to put everything in there that you would get out of coming to therapy. And I've tried to make it very practical and accessible.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time and for all of your insight, advice, and definitely check out the book. I've had a look through myself and it is really, really helpful. Plus, I love the front cover. It's amazing. But yeah, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast.
Thank you for having us. We appreciate it, Katie.
Yes, thank you, Katie.
So hopefully you found that just as useful as I did. There were so many valuable insights, and everything we talked about is linked in the description below.